When Belgian Malinois K9 officer Diesel refuses to leave his partner's hospital bedside after a near-fatal shooting the staff at Riverside Memorial in Westbrook, assumes it's just loyalty. But as Officer Daniel Mitchell's condition mysteriously worsens, Diesel's behavior becomes increasingly alarming, growling at certain medications, becoming agitated around specific staff members, and positioning himself protectively between his unconscious handler and the hospital's new administrator. What no one realizes is that Diesel's extraordinary sense of smell has detected something the hospital's advanced equipment cannot. Someone is poisoning his partner through his foreline. As young DRCD Stephen Reynolds and Nurse Maria Sanchez begin to trust the K9's instincts, they uncover a deadly conspiracy connecting Westwood pharmaceutical corrupt officials and the very hospital meant to save Officer Mitchell's life. The reason this loyal K9 refuses to leave will stun not just the doctors but the entire community, revealing that sometimes the most remarkable medical tool isn't technology, but the unbreakable bond between an officer and his four-legged partner. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Memorial Hospital cast long shadows across the polished floor as Diesel, a Belgian Malinois with intelligent amber eyes, stands rigid beside the bed of his unconscious handler, Officer Daniel Mitchell. For 3 days, the K9 officer hasn't moved from this position, hasn't eaten more than a few reluctant bites, hasn't slept for more than minutes at a time. The nurses call it loyalty, the doctors call it attachment. But no one yet realizes it's something far more urgent as protection. When Officer Daniel Mitchell was wheeled into Riverside Memorial 3 days ago, his body broken and bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds after a drug raid gone wrong, the medical staff tried everything to remove his K9 part from the ambulance. But Diesel refused. His teeth beat his body position between the gurney, and anyone who approached it took Captain Thomas Wilson's direct command, the only voice besides Daniel's that Diesel would obey without question, to get the dog to stand down long enough for the trauma team to work. In my 15 years working emergency medicine, I've never seen anything quite like this, Dr. Elena Winter says, watching the Belgian Malinois from the doorway of the ICU room. He hasn't left Officer Mitchell's side for a moment, not for food, not for walks, not even when that new administrator tried to have him removed yesterday. Nurse Maria Sanchez adjusts Daniel's foreline and glances at the loyal K9. There's something else happening here, Doctor. This isn't just a dog missing his owner. Look at how he watches everyone who comes into the room. Look at how he sniffs the medications before I administer them, Dr. Winter sighs. He's a police dog, Maria. They're trained to be alert. This is different. Maria insists, moving closer to check Daniel's vitals. It's like he's guarding him from something or someone in the hallway outside. ICU room 217, Officer Jason Thompson leans against the wall, his own K9 partner at his feet. Diesel and Dan are different, he explains to Dr. Stephen Reynolds, a young resident who has taken a special interest in the case. You know how most K9 handlers say their dogs are just tools of the job. Dan never saw it that way from day one. That dog was his partner, not his property. What happened out there, Dr. Reynolds asks, watching the window as Diesel's ears prick forward. When a new nurse enters the room, the official report says it was a routine drug bust. Thompson's face darkens. Nothing routine about it. Dan had been investigating some connections between local dealers and Westwood Pharmaceuticals for months, said something about prescription drugs being modified, distributed illegally. Most of us thought he was chasing ghosts until a commotion inside the room interrupts him. Diesel is on his feet, a low growl emanating from his throat. As Dr. Victor Coleman, the newly appointed hospital administrator, approached is Daniel's bed with a clipboard. That dog needs to be removed. Coleman snaps at Nurse Sanchez. This is a hospital, not a kennel. I've already spoken with the chief of police. With all due respect, sir, Sanchez replies. Captain Wilson authorized Diesel's presence. You'd need to speak with him directly. Coleman's expression sours as he makes a note on his clipboard. I intend to. In the meantime, I'll be personally overseeing Officer Mitchell's cares. Case has drawn significant media attention. We need to ensure everything is handled properly. Dr. Reynolds enters the room, positioning himself subtly between Coleman and the bed. Dr. Winters is the attending physician. Any changes to Officer Mitchell's care would need to go through her first. Coleman's eyes narrow slightly. Of course, Dr. Reynolds, I'm merely reviewing protocols. He moves toward the four stand, and Diesel's growl deepens, his body tensing. I wouldn't get any closer if I were you, Officer Thompson warns from the doorway. Diesel takes his job seriously. Coleman withdraws his hands Slowly, perhaps we should discuss this outside. He gestures to the hallway, and Dr. Reynolds follows, casting a backward glance at Diesel, who watches him intensely as they leave. Nurse Sanchez kneels beside Diesel, pretending to check his water bowl. What is it, boy? What are you seeing that were not the afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across Daniel's still form? His sister sits beside the bed, her fingers intertwined with her brother's unresponsive hand. Diesel lays at her feet, eyes never leaving Daniel's face. You should take him home, get him some proper rest, Captain Wilson suggests gently, standing at the foot of the bed. He's exhausted, CLA shakes her head. I tried this morning, he wouldn't make it past the elevator planet himself and wouldn't budge even with your commands. She wipes a tear from her cheek. Besides, Dan would want him here. They haven't been separated since Dan adopted him 4 years ago. Captain Wilson's weathered face softens. That dog changed everything for Dan after Sarah died, gave him purpose again. They save each other, Scylla whispers outside the room. Dr. Reynolds studies Daniel's chart with growing concern. His white blood cell count is rising, but there's no clear infection source. And these liver enzyme levels don't make sense given his injuries. Dr. Winters frowns. Reviewing the numbers could be a reaction to the antibiotics. Let's switch his medication and run more tests. Dr. Reynolds hesitates. Have you noticed how Diesel reacts when certain medications are administered, particularly the ones that come from the special pharmacy stock? Stephen, please, not this again. You can't base medical decisions on a dog's behavior. But what if we follow the evidence, scientific evidence, Dr. Winters taps the chart, order the new tests, and change his antibiotics. Let's see how he responds later that evening. As the hospital of the night shift nurse Sanchez enters Daniel's room with his evening medications, Diesel watches her carefully, nose working overtime. He gestures to the hallway, and Dr. Reynolds follows, casting a backward glance at Diesel, who watches him intensely. As they leave, nurse Sanchez kneels beside Diesel, pretending to check his water bowl. What is it, boy? What are you seeing that were not the afternoon sun slanted to the blinds, painting stripes across Daniel's still form? His sister sits beside the bed, her fingers intertwined with her brother's unresponsive hand. Diesel lays at her feet, eyes never leaving Daniel's face. You should take him home, get him some proper rest, Captain Wilson suggests gently, standing at the foot of the bed. He's exhausted, so he shakes her head. I tried this morning, he wouldn't make it past elevator planet himself and wouldn't budge even with your command. She wipes a tear from her cheek. Besides, Dan would want him here. They haven't been separated since Dan adopted him 4 years ago. Captain Wilson's weathered face softens. That dog changed everything for Dan after Sarah died, gave him purpose again. They save each other, CLA whispers outside the room. Dr. Reynolds studies Daniel's chart with growing concern. His white blood cell count is rising, but there's no clear infection source. And these liver enzyme levels don't make sense given his injuries. Dr. Winters frowns. Reviewing the numbers could be a reaction to the antibiotics. Let's switch his medication and run more tests. Dr. Reynolds hesitates. Have you noticed how Diesel reacts when certain medications are administered, particularly the ones that come from the special pharmacy stock? Stephen, please, not this again. You can't base medical decisions on a dog's behavior. But what if we follow the evidence, scientific evidence? Dr. Winters taps the chart, order the new tests, and change his antibiotics. Let's see how he responds later that evening. As the hospital of the night shift nurse Sanchez enters Daniel's room with his evening medications, Diesel watches her carefully, nose working overtime as she approaches the 4 lineates. Okay, boy, this will help him get better, she soothes, but Diesel's ears remain flat against his head as she prepares to inject the medication into 4-port. Diesel suddenly lurches forward, knocking the syringe from her hand. It falls to the floor, the clear liquid spattering across the tiles. Diesel nurse Sanchez gasps, startled, but not afraid. The K9 isn't acting aggressively toward her. His attention is fixed on the spilled medication. Sniffing it intently, Dr. Reynolds appears in the doorway. Everything okay in here? Diesel knocked the medication out of my hand, she explains, reaching for a towel to clean up the spill weight. Dr. Reynolds says, an idea forming. He grabs a specimen cup from a nearby supply cart and carefully collects some of the spilled liquid. Let's hold off on giving him this batch. Use a different vial from a main pharmacy, not the special stock. Dr. Winters won't approve of this, nurse Sanchez warns. Then we don't tell her yet. Not until I check something. He pockets the specimen cup. Trust me, Maria, and maybe trust Diesel too. At midnight, Dr. Reynolds sits alone in the hospital lab running tests on the liquid. Sample his phone. Buzzes a text from Detective Sophia Martinez. Found something on Westwood. Need to talk tomorrow, 7 a.m. Coffee shop across from hospital. He's about to reply when the test results appear on the screen. His eyes widen, and he checks the analysis twice to be sure the medication is contaminated with something that shouldn't be there, a compound That wouldn't show up on standard toxicology screens, but would slowly damage the liver and kidneys if administered repeatedly, my God. He whispers Diesel was right morning light filters through the blinds as Dr. Reynolds slips into Daniel's room. Before his shift officially begins, Diesel raises his head from where he's lied beside the bed, recognition in his intelligent eyes. You knew, didn't you? Dr. Reynolds says, quietly approaching. The K9 with newfound respect. You could smell it when no one else could detect it. He reviews Daniel's chart, noting that his vitals have stabilized overnight after receiving the replacement medication from the main pharmacy. No decline for the first time in days. Dr. Reynolds' stern voice interrupts from the doorway. Dr. Coleman stands, her arms crossed. May I ask what you're doing in here? Before your shift, just checking on our patient, Reynolds replies, careful to keep his expression neutral. He had an unusual reaction to his medication. Last night, Coleman's eyes flick to the chart. I see, and you didn't think to report this to me. It's all in the notes, sir. Dr. Winters has been informed. Colin steps closer, his voice dropping. Officer Mitchell's case is sensitive. Any irregularities should come directly to me. Hospital policy, of course. Reynolds nods, but he notices how Diesel has positioned himself between Coleman and Daniel's bed. His posture alert, vigilant. Coleman reaches for Daniel's line. What replacement medication did you authorize before Reynolds can answer? Diesel emits a low warning growl. Coleman withdraws his hand quickly. That dog is becoming a liability. He says coldly, I'm calling animal control today. I wouldn't advise that, sir. Reynolds replies, standing his ground. Captain Wilson won't allow it. And frankly, neither will I. Coleman's face hardens. You're overstepping. Dr. Reynolds, remember your position here. After Coleman leaves, Reynolds kneels beside Diesel, speaking in a low, urgent voice. I need to meet with Detective Martinez. I'll be back soon. He glances at Daniel. Keep watching over him. Boy, you're the only one who really knows what's happening across the street at the coffee shop. Detective Sophia Martinez slides a folder across the table. Westwood Pharmaceuticals has government contracts worth millions. They're supposed to be developing new pain medications for veteran care. But Dan found evidence they're diverting some compounds for street distribution. That would explain why someone wants him silenced, Reynolds says, sharing his discovery about the contaminated medication. Martinez's eyes widen. So the dog Diesel isn't just being loyal, he's actively protecting Officer Mitchell. He can smell the poison when none of our tests detected it. We need proof that Coleman is involved, Martinez says. Check your watch, and we need to ensure Daniel's safety until he wakes up. If he wakes up, Reynolds corrects grimly, even without further sabotage. The damage already done is severe. Back at the hospital, so he sits with her brother. The morning news playing softly on the television. A story about Westwood Pharmaceuticals' charitable donation to Riverside Memorial Hospital catches her attention, featuring none other than Dr. Victor Coleman. Except ING, an oversized check from Lucas Harrington, Westwood CO. That's the doctor who keeps trying to change Dan's medication. She murmurs to Diesel, who watches the screen intently, the one you don't like. The K9's ears prick up at the sound of approaching footsteps. Dr. Coleman enters with 2 security guards. Miss Mitchell, he says with practiced sympathy, I'm afraid I have to insist that the dog be removed. We receive complaints from other patients' families. CLA stands instinctively, moving closer to Diesel. My brother's captain authorized his presence. Hospital policy overrides that authorization. Coleman explains smoothly. These officers will escort the animal to the shelter until other arrangements can be made. As one of the guards approaches with a catch pole, Diesel backs against Daniel's bed. A warning rumble in his chest. Please don't make this more difficult, Coleman says. Suddenly, Daniel's monitor begins to beep erratically. All eyes turn to the patient, whose fingers have begun to twitch. The first movement in days. Dan Silly gasps, rushing to her brother's side. Diesel's posture changes instantly, his attention fully on his partner. He whines softly, nudging Daniel's hand with his nose. Dr. Coleman, peace slightly. I'll get Dr. Winters, he says, quickly exiting the room. The security guards exchange uncertain glances, lowering the catch pole. Celia leans over her brother, tears streaming down her face. Dan, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me, and ever so slightly. Officer Daniel Mitchell's fingers curl around his sister's hand. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoyed, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. News of Officer Mitchell's movement spreads through Riverside Memorial like wildfire. By mid-morning, Dr. Winter is personally overseeing his care. Her previous skepticism regarding Diesel somewhat Softened by the dog's behavior during Daniel's brief moment of consciousness, the K9 had responded before anyone else noticed a change in Daniel's condition, before even the monitors registered the shift in brain activity. I've ordered a complete neurological workup. Dr. Winters tells CLA, reviewing Daniel's latest vitals and movement is promising, but I don't want to raise false hopes. Brain injuries are complex. CLA nods her hand, still entwined with her brother's. He squeezed my hand, Dr. Hees. Still in there, Dr. Winter's expression remains guarded. Let's see what the tests show outside the room. Dr. Reynolds confers quietly with Nurse Sanchez Coleman. Hasn't returned since Daniel showed signs of consciousness. He notes concern evident in his voice. That's not all, Sanchez replies, keeping her voice low. The medication logs for Officer Mitchell have been altered. Someone accessed the system last night and changed the records of what was. Administered. Reynolds glances through the doorway at Diesel, who remained steadfast beside Daniel's bed. We need to secure a sample of the original medication. The batch. Diesel reacted. Do we have any left? No, but there should be more in the special pharmacy stock. The doses come in sealed packages labeled for specific patients. Reynolds checks his watch. Coleman will be in administration meetings until noon. That gives us a window. You can't just break into the pharmacy. Sanchez hisses. You lose your license, your career. And if I do nothing, Officer Mitchell might lose his life. Reynolds' expression hardens. I've already called Detective Martinez. She's bringing a warrant at the nurse's station. Captain Wilson discusses Daniel's security with the floor supervisor. I want an officer outside his door at all times, he insists, and no one administers any medication without Nurse Sanchez or Dr. Reynolds present. Captain, with all due respect, you don't have authority over hospital procedures. The supervisor begins. I'm not asking. Wilson interrupts, his voice calm but unyielding. Officer Mitchell was shot while investigating a case that appears to have connections within this hospital. Until I'm confident in his safety, these measures stay in place. Inside room 217, Silly steps out to take a phone call, leaving Daniel momentarily alone with Diesel. The K9 ears twitch at the sound of the ventilation system cycling on his nose. Works overtime, sampling the air. Something has changed. A subtle shift in the room's scent profile. He rises to his feet, amber eyes tracking across the ceiling vents in the corridor. Detective Martinez arrives with the promised warrant, accompanied by a forensic technician. Where's Reynolds? She asked Officer Thompson, who's standing guard outside Daniel's room meeting with Dr. Winters. They're reviewing Mitchell's latest test results. Martinez nods. We need to move quickly. This warrant gives us access to the special pharmacy stock and Mitchell's medical records, but hospital administration could still throw up roadblocks inside the room. Diesel's behavior grows increasingly agitated. He paces between the bed and the door, whining softly, then louder. The monitor tracking Daniel's heart rate shows a slight increase. Officer Thompson notices through the window something's wrong with Diesel. He tells Martinez, reaching for the door handle. The moment the door opens, Diesel bolts into the corridor, barking sharply, the specific alert pattern he uses when detecting dangerous substances. He heads straight for the ventilation control panel at the end of the hallway. He's alerting Thompson. Says, immediately following the K9, something in the air system. Martinez reacts instantly. Thompson, trigger the fire alarm. We need to override the ventilation. Without hesitation, Officer Thompson smashes the fire alarm with his elbow. Sirens wail throughout the floor as the emergency systems activate. Sprinklers engage, and the air handlers automatically shut down to prevent the spread of smoke. Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Winters come running from the consultation room. What happened? Reynolds demands, already moving toward Daniel's room. Diesel, alerted on the ventilation system. Martinez explains, following closely, something's being pumped into Mitchell's room. Inside, water from the sprinklers rains down on Daniel's still form. Nurse Sanchez is already disconnecting non-essential monitors and covering critical equipment with plastic sheets. We need to move him, she shouts over the alarms. This floor will evacuate for fire alert as medical staff begins the process of transferring patients. Dr. Coleman appears, his face a mask of professional concern. What's happening here? He demands, taking the chaos fire protocol. Dr. Winters replies to, we're moving critical patients first. Coleman steps closer to Daniel's gurney. I'll oversee Officer Mitchell's transfer personally. That won't be necessary. Detective Martinez interjects, producing her badge. Sophia Martinez, Westbrook Police. I have questions regarding Officer Mitchell's care. Coleman's expression flickers briefly before settling back into professional neutrality. This isn't the time, detective. We're in the middle of an emergency evacuation, which is precisely why I need to ensure Officer Mitchell's safety. during a transport. She holds up the warrant. I also have authorization to inspect the special pharmacy stock and Officer Mitchell's complete medical records, the original records, not the altered versions. Color drains from Coleman's face. I don't know what you're implying. You can cooperate now, or we can continue this conversation downtown Martinez. Cuts in your choice, Dr. Coleman. While this confrontation unfolds, medical staff officially transfers Daniel to a gurney. Diesel never leaves his side, still alert and watchful fight the chaos, as they wheel Daniel toward the service elevator, reserved for patient transport during emergencies. Coleman makes a subtle movement toward his pocket. Diesel reacts, instantly lunging forward with a warning bark that freezes Coleman in place. Officer Thompson quickly steps between them, hand moving to sidearm. Keep your hands where I can see them. Dr. Martinez moves forward professionally, removing a small syringe from Coleman's lab coat pocket. What were you planning to do with this? She asks, carefully securing the item in an evidence bag. Standard emergency medication, Coleman replies, but sweat beads on his forehead. Despite the cool air, will let the lab. Determined that Martinez says, Dr. Coleman, you're coming with me, as Coleman is led away by a uniformed officer who arrived as backup. Dr. Reynolds joins the team, transferring Daniel to a secure floor of the pharmacy stock. He asks Martinez, quietly already being secured as evidence. Initial field test shows traces of a compound similar to what you found in the earlier sample in the service elevator. Nurse Sanchez monitors Daniel's vitals while Dr. Winters adjusts his oxygen flow. His condition is stabilizing. Winters notes with surprise blood pressure returning to normal range. The toxin was in the air. Reynolds realizes they were trying to poison everyone in the room. Diesel said anyone who might figure out what was happening to him. The elevator doors open to reveal the hospital's most secure area, the VIP floor, usually reserved for visiting dignitaries and patients requiring exceptional security. Captain Wilson stands waiting, having made the arrangements while the evacuation was underway. How is he? Will Wyson asks, as they wheel Daniel into a large private room with advanced monitoring equipment. Holding his own, Dr. Winters replies, immediately connecting Daniel to the new monitors. His latest neurological tests actually showed improvement. Before all this happened, he could regain consciousness. Soon. Then we need be ready. Martinez says whoever tried to silence him today will try again. Coleman isn't working alone. As the medical team settles Daniel in his new room, Diesel performs a thorough inspection of the space, sniffing every corner before finally settling into position beside the bed. His vigilance hasn't wavered despite the exhausting events. We should get him checked out too. Dr. Reynolds suggests watching the loyal K9. He's an exposed to whatever was in that ventilation system. Claire, who arrived shortly after Daniel was moved, shakes her head. Good luck with that. He won't leave Dan's side willingly. Then we bring the vet to him. Captain Wilson decides, already making the call later. That evening, after Daniel has been stabilized in his new room, Dr. Reynolds sits with Detective Martinez in the hospital cafeteria, reviewing what they've learned. The toxicology results from the ventilation system show a sophisticated aerosolized compound, something that would cause respiratory distress, but appear natural in someone already on a ventilator. Martinez slides a folder across the table. We search Coleman's office, found correspondence between him and Lucas Harrington at Westwood Pharmaceuticals. They've been working together for at least 2 years. What's Harrington's interest in all this? Why target a police officer? That's where it gets interesting. Martinez replies, lowering her voice. Mitchell's investigation wasn't just about illegal distribution of prescription drugs. He found evidence that Westwood was conducting unauthorized tests of experimental pain medications using street addicts as unwitting test subjects. Reynolds' eyes widen. That's why he was watching there. Warehouse exactly, and according to records we seized from Coleman's home, at least 12 people have died from these tests. Mitchell was close to connecting everything when he was shot back in a secure room. CLA dozes in a chair while Diesel maintains his watchful position. The only sounds are the steady beep of the heart monitor and the software, the oxygen machine. In the dim light, Daniel's eyelids flutter briefly, then still. Diesel notices. Immediately, he rises, moving closer to Daniel's face. His wet nose gently nudging his partner's hand. A low whine builds in his throat, not as alert sound, but something more personal, more urgent. Daniel's fingers twitch again, more purposefully. This time his breathing pattern changes, becoming less mechanical and more natural. Diesel's tail begins to wag slowly, then with increasing enthusiasm. CLA wakes to the sound of Diesel's whine. What is it, boy? She asks, immediately checking her brother Daniel. Eyes open. Dan. CLA gasps, pressing the call button repeatedly. Dan, can you hear me? His gaze is unfocused at first, then gradually sharpens. His lips move, forming silent words around a breathing tube. Don't try to talk. See, Sue's tears streaming down her face. You're safe. Diesel's here too. He hasn't left your side for a moment at the sound of his name. Diesel places his front paws carefully on the edge of the bed, bringing his face into Daniel's line of sight. Recognition flickers in the officer's eyes, and his hand moves weakly toward his partner, Dr. Reynolds. Rushes into room, alerted by the nurse monitoring Daniel's vitals in the station outside. He's awake. He asks immediately, checking pupillary response. With a pen light, Daniel's eyes follow the light. His response is appropriate. Is sluggish. Reynolds smiles broadly. Welcome back, Officer Mitchell. You've had quite an audience waiting for you. Daniel's gaze never leaves Diesel, who is settled back down with his chin on the edge of the bed, amber eyes fixed on his partner's face. The connection between them is almost palpable, a silent communication built on years of trust. One need to remove the breathing tube. If he's ready, Reynolds tells CLA, already preparing the necessary equipment. It won't be comfortable for him, but it'll allow him to speak. Should I step out? CLA asks. No need, just stay where he can see you. Reynolds begins the careful process of extubation, explaining each step to Daniel before proceeding. Once the tube is removed and Daniel takes his first unassisted breaths, Reynolds offers him small ice chips to soothe his throat. Take it easy. Don't try to speak too much. Yet Daniel's first raspy word is barely audible. Diesel, the K9's ears prick forward, his entire body alert. In a tent, he's been here the whole time. CLA explains, squeezing her brother's hand. Wouldn't leave no matter what anyone tried. Daniel's eyes find Reynolds a warehouse. He manages grimacing at the effort of speaking. We know about Westwood. Reynolds assures him. Detective Martinez has been building the case while you've been recovering. Coleman's in custody. Relief flashes across Daniel's face, followed quickly by concern. Not just Coleman. We know Claire soothes. Rest now. You can tell us everything when you're stronger. But Daniel's agitation grows. No time. He whispers urgently, tonight shipment. Reynolds and Claire exchange worried glances. What shipment? Dan. Claire asks gently. Daniel's eyes close briefly, gathering strength. When they open again, there's a fierce determination that reminds them both that beneath the hospital hit gown and bandages is a decorated police officer. Westwood shipping out evidence. He manages between labored breaths. Midnight, Pier 17. Reynolds looks at his watch. That's less than 3 hours from now. Need to stop them. Daniel insists, trying unsuccessfully to sit up. You need to rest. Reynolds counters, carefully easing him back against the pillows. I'll call Detective Martinez. Immediately, as Reynolds steps away to make the call, Daniel's hand finds Diesel's head, fingers weakly scratching behind the K9's ears. Good boy, he whispers. Good boy. Diesel's entire body wriggles with joy at his partner's touch. His mission protection momentarily overshadowed by simple happiness. But even in this moment of reunion, the loyal K9 doesn't fully relax his vigilance. His ears remain attuned to every sound in the hallway, his body positioned between Daniel and the door, because Diesel knows what the humans are only beginning to understand. The danger isn't over. Someone else will come, and when they do, will be ready. Detective Martinez's unmarked car speeds through the rain-slick streets of Westbrook, lights flashing, but siren silent in the passenger seat. Officer Thompson checks his service weapon, his expression grim. The radio crackles with updates from the tactical team already taking position around Pier 17. Team in place. Captain Wilson's voice confirms no movement yet, but we've spotted increased security at the Westwood warehouse. Private contractors, not regular staff. Copy that. Martinez responds, taking a sharp turn onto Harbor Drive. We're 5 minutes out. Remember, we need those shipping manifests intact. How certain are we about Mitchell's intel? Wilson asks. He just regained consciousness after days in a coma. Dr. Reynolds confirmed his neurological responses are strong. Martinez replies. Besides, Diesel backed him up. The dog. Wilson's skepticism is evident even through the radio. When Mitchell mentioned the shipment, Diesel's behavior changed completely. Reynolds said it was like the K9 understood exactly what was at stake. Thompson checks his watch. 11:35. If Mitchell's right, we don't have much time back at Riverside Memorial. Daniel Mitchell drifts between consciousness and sleep, his body demanding rest while his mind races with urgency. Dr. Reynolds monitors his vitals, concerned about the spike in blood pressure. You need to calm down, Reynolds urges gently. Your body has been through severe trauma. Can't? Daniel rasps, his voice still roar from the breathing tube. Need to know what's happening. Claire enters with a cup of ice chips. Martinez just texted me. There in position at the pier, Daniel visibly relaxes slightly at this news. Diesel, who has been pacing restlessly between the bed and the door, settles briefly, his intelligent eyes fixed on his partner. Tell me everything. Daniel manages, accepting an ice chip from his sister. How long was I out? Reynolds hesitates, exchanging glances with Silly. You were brought in 5 days ago with multiple gunshot wounds, 2 to the chest, 1 a grazing. Your head, you've been in a medically induced coma to help manage the brain swelling. And Diesel Silly smiled softly. Hasn't left your side for a moment, not for food, not for walks. The staff tried everything, but he refused to budge. Her voice catches. He knew something was wrong with your treatment before any of the doctors did. Daniel's hand finds Diesel's head, weakly scratching that special spot behind his ears. Always had my back. He saved your life. Reynolds confirms, if he hadn't alerted us to the contaminated medication and then to the ventilation system. He lets the implications hang in the air. Daniel's gaze sharpens. Coleman in custody. Martinez found evidence linking him directly to Westwood. He was being paid to ensure certain patients received modified medications. Test subjects who wouldn't be missed if treatments went wrong. Anger flashes across Daniel's pale face, just like the street addicts. Exactly from what we've pieced together, Westwood has been conducting unauthorized trials of experimental pain medications when you started investigating there. Distribution network became a threat. Daniel finishes his breathing labor from the effort conversation. Not just Coleman, though. Harrington has connections outside the room. A nurse approaches with medication tray. The officer stationed at the door check her ID badge carefully before allowing her to enter. Time for your pain medication. Officer Mitchell, she announces, moving toward the 4 stand. Diesel's reaction is immediate and alarming. He leaps up, planting himself between the nurse and Daniel's bed. Hackles raise, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest. The nurse freezes. What's wrong with the dog? Reynolds moves quickly, positioning himself beside Diesel. Which medication are you administering? Fennel for pain management, as prescribed. The nurse replies, appearing confused and somewhat frightened by Diesel's reaction. CLA checks the medication order on Daniel's chart. That's not right. Dr. Winter specifically switched him to morphine because of potential interaction with his other medications. The nurse pales slightly. There must be a mistake in the system. I was just following orders. Whose orders? Reynolds demands, a suspicion growing as Diesel's growl deepens. Before she can answer, the nurse makes a sudden move, reaching beneath her scrubs. Officer Miller, stationed at the door, draws his weapon, immediately hands where I can see them. Instead of complying, the nurse lunges toward Daniel's bed. Diesel reacts with lightning speed, launching himself at her arm and clamping down with care. Why control pressure enough to stop her, not enough to cause serious injury. The syringe in her hand clatters to the floor as she cries out in pain. In surprise, Officer Miller secures her, within seconds forcing her face down on the floor to apply handcuffs. Call security. Reynolds shouts to a wide-eyed aide who has appeared in the doorway, and get Dr. Winters up here. Now Daniel struggles to sit up, his face contorted with pain. The sudden movement. Diesel release. He commands, his voice stronger than it has been since waking the K9. Immediately lets go of the nurse's arm, backing up to stand protectively beside Daniel's bed, still alert and ready. Hussein Usila demands as Miller pulls a handcuffed nurse to her feet. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The woman spits all pretense of being a nurse. This goes higher than you can imagine. At Pier 7, the operation is underway. Martinez's team has intercepted the Westwood truck, attempting to load shipping containers onto a waiting cargo vessel. The manifest lists the contents as medical supplies, but the reality is far different. We got documentation. Captain Martinez reports over the radio. Surveying the crates, our officers have opened experimental compounds, research notes, patient data. Everything Mitchell said would be here, and Harrington Wilson asks no sign of him yet. But we detain his head of security and 3 others. A sudden commotion erupts at the warehouse entrance. Lucas Harrington, CEO of Westwood Pharmaceuticals, emerges, flanked by attorneys and private security. This is an illegal seizure, one of the lawyers announces loudly. You have no jurisdiction over proprietary medical research. Martinez holds up the warrant. This authorizes us to seize evidence related to the attempted murder of Officer Daniel Mitchell and the illegal testing of unauthorized substances. Ridiculous accusations. Harrington scoffs, is composed, exterior showing cracks as he surveys the open crates. Those are legitimate medications bound for approved clinical trials overseas. Then you won't mind waiting while we verify that. Martinez replies coolly, Mr. Harrington, I'd like you to accompany me to the station to answer some questions. I most certainly will not. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Martinez's expression hardens. A man who thinks he's above the law. We have Coleman in custody, Mr. Harrington. He's already talking, trying to cut a deal. Harrington's face drains of color. I want my lawyer present for any questions, of course. But first, Martinez is interrupted by an urgent call on her radio detective officer. Miller's voice crackles. We've had another attempt on Mitchell's life. At the hospital, subject in custody claims connection to Harrington. Martinez locks eyes with a pharmaceutical executive. Sounds like we have more to discuss than I thought. Back at Riverside Memorial, security has been doubled around Daniel's room. Dr. Winters personally examines the syringe confiscated from the fake nurse. Her expression grave. A lethal dose of potassium chloride. She confirms would have stopped his heart instantly and appeared as a natural complication from his injuries. Reynolds shakes his head in disbelief. She had legitimate hospital credentials. How did she get past our security protocols? Because she works here. CLA realizes showing of the ID badge. Security had confiscated Linda Harrington. She's a part-time nurse in pediatrics, and Lucas Harrington's wife, Daniel, now fully alert despite his exhaustion, pieces it together. The perfect infiltrator. Hospital staff access to the medical record system and a vested interest in protecting her husband's company. Reynolds finishes. Outside the window, lightning flashes across the Westbrook skyline as the storm intense. Iffy's the weather mirrors attention in the room, where Diesel has resumed his vigilant position beside Daniel's bed, amber eyes tracking every movement. It's not over, Daniel says quietly, his hand resting on Diesel's head. Harrington has political connections, friends in high places. Dr. Winters checks his four-line, ensuring nothing has been tampered with. You should rest. You've done your part. Let the police handle it from here. Daniel shakes his head stubbornly. Can't rest. Not yet. He turns to Officer Miller. I need to speak with Martinez now. Miller nods, already dialing on a secured phone. Detective Mitchell needs to talk to you urgently. When Martinez answers, her voice sounds strained. Martinez, here you're on speaker with Captain Wilson. Harrington's not your only problem, Daniel says. Without preamble, his voice are gaining strength with urgency. Check the shipping manifest for a specific destination. Medicor Industries in Panama. Checking now. Wilson replies. The sound of rustling papers comes through the speaker. You're right. Martinez confirms moments later. Final destination listed as Medicor facility in Panama City. What's the significance? Medicor is a shell company, Daniel explains, wincing as a wave of pain shoots through his chest front. For a larger operation, look at the Pharmaceutical Licensing Board, who approved Westwood's original research. Permits more rustling papers. Then Wilson's voice sharp with realization. Commissioner Lawrence Webb, the same Webb who authorized my investigation, then suddenly ordered me to drop it 3 weeks ago. Daniel confirms the same Webb who knew exactly where my raid was happening tonight. I was shot. The implications hang heavy in the air. Their own commissioner, the head of Westbrook's police department, potentially involved in a conspiracy that nearly cost Daniel his life. We need to move carefully. Martinez says after a long pause. If Webb is involved, he has access to everything. Case files, evidence, lockup, witness statements. Not everything, Daniel. Counters check Diesel's collar. CLA looks at the K9 with surprise. His collar. Daniel nods. Weekly backup microchip sewn into the lining. Recorded conversations. Photographs from the warehouse. Everything I couldn't trust in the official evidence channels. Reynolds carefully examines Diesel's tactical collar, finding a small, well-hidden compartment containing a thumbnail-sized memory card. This could break the entire case wide open. Always had a feeling someone on the inside was compromised. Daniel explains, his energy clearly fading. Needed insurance, and you trusted Diesel to protect it. CLA realizes new appreciation in her eyes as she looks at the loyal K9. Daniel's hand weakly scratches Diesel's ear. Only partner I could trust completely at the pier. Martinez received the information about Commissioner Webb with stunned silence. She looks at Harrington, whose smug expression has returned as he confers quietly with his attorney's change of plans. She tells Wilson, keeping her voice low, we need to secure this evidence immediately, someplace Webb can't access. Wilson nods grimly. Federal lockup. I have a contact at the FBI who can take custody within the hour. Do it. Martinez agrees. And nobody calls us into headquarters. As far as the commissioner knows, we came up empty tonight. As rain pounds against the windows of Daniel's hospital room, Reynolds carefully extracts a memory chip from Diesel's collar. I'll get this too. Detective Martinez right away. No, Daniel says, firmly fighting to stay awake. Despite his exhaustion, too risky, Webb has people everywhere need someone outside the department. My brother works for the FBI. Dr. Winters offers unexpectedly. Everyone turns to her in surprise. Cybercrime division. He can ensure the data reaches the right on people Daniel studies her face, then nods slowly. Do it as the night deepens. The hospital gradually quiets. Extra security remains positioned throughout the floor, and Daniel finally succumbs to exhaustion, drifting into natural sleep for the first time since regaining consciousness. Diesel maintains his position, amber eyes gleaming in the dim light, ears alert to every sound in the corridor outside, so watches the K9 with newfound respect, understanding now that his refusal to leave wasn't just loyalty or habit, it was purpose, protection, partnership. In its truest form, he knew all along, didn't he? She whispers to Reynolds, who has remained to monitor Daniel's condition. That's why he wouldn't leave, why he reacted to certain medication, certain people. Reynolds nods, watching Diesel's methodical surveillance of the room. I've worked with therapy dogs before, seen service animals perform incredible tasks, but this, he shakes his head in amazement. This is something else entirely outside the window. The storm begins to subside, the heavy clouds breaking to reveal patches of star-filled sky. A new day is approaching, one that will bring federal investigations, arrests, public revelations about corruption at the highest levels of Westbrook's institutions. But in this moment, in the quiet room 217, there's only the steady rhythm of Daniel's breathing, the software of monitoring equipment, and the unwavering vigilance of a K9 officer who understood what the doctor couldn't see and the machines couldn't detect, that sometimes protection means refusing to leave no matter what. And as the first light of dawn touches the horizon, Diesel finally allows himself to rest, his body curled protectively at the foot of Daniel's bed. One ears still attentively raised. His mission isn't over yet, but for now, in this moment, his partner is safe. Mara brings of activity to Riverside Memorial Hospital. FBI agents in dark suits move efficiently through the corridors, setting up a secure perimeter around Daniel's room. Winter brother Special Agent Mark Winters personally takes custody of the memory chip from Diesel's collar, treating it with the gravity of crucial national evidence. The data is intact, he confirms after a preliminary examination. Officer Mitchell's documentation is meticulous, dates, times, recordings, photographs. This gives us everything we need to move on. Webb and the entire network. Daniel, propped up slightly in his hospital bed, nods. Weekly, the commissioner's weekly meeting with the mayor happens this morning, 9 o'clock sharp. We're already in position. Agent Winters assures him the FBI has had suspicions about medical operations for months, but we've never been able to connect them directly to Westbrook until now. Captain Wilson, who has been coordinating with the federal agents, looks trouble. We've served with Webb for years. None of us saw this coming. That's what made him effective. Daniel responds, wincing as he shifts position. Respected, connected, above suspicion. At the foot of the bed, Diesel raises his head at Daniel's discomfort, instantly alert. His unwavering attention to his partner's condition hasn't diminished despite the room now being filled with trusted allies. Your partner here saw what none of us could. Agent Winters remarks, respectfully acknowledging the K9. Without him, we wouldn't be having this conversation down the hall. Dr. Reynolds confers with the hospital's board of directors, who have convened an emergency meeting following the arrest of Dr. Coleman and the attempted murder by Linda Harrington. We need a full audit of every patient who received medication from the special pharmacy stock. Reynolds insists, spreading documentation across the conference table, and we need to contact every patient who was treated by Dr. Coleman in the past 2 years. The board members exchange concerned glances, clearly worried about potential liability that could expose a hospital to significant legal action. The chairman points out with respect. Sir Reynolds counters firmly, people have died, more could be suffering long-term effects from unauthorized medications. The ethical obligation here is clear. Dr. Winters, who has joined the meeting after checking on Daniel, adds her voice to Reynolds. Stephen is right. As medical professionals, our first duty is to our patients. The hospital's reputation will suffer far more if we try to cover this up across town. At the Westbrook Police Headquarters, the commissioner's weekly briefing is interrupted by the arrival of federal agents and Detective Martinez, who carries a sealed warrant. Lawrence Webb Martinez announces, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. You're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder of the police officer. The ASM LED police leadership watches in stunned silence as their commissioner is read his rights. Some faces register shock, others a grim understanding, as if pieces of a puzzle they hadn't known they were solving suddenly fall into place. You have no idea what you're doing, Martinez, Webb hisses, as agent secures wrists with handcuffs. This goes beyond Westbrook, beyond one officer. I know exactly what I'm doing, she replies, calmly upholding the oath you betrayed back at the hospital. Daniel watches the news coverage of Webb's arrest on the small television mounted on the wall. CLA sits beside him, her face reflecting a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety. It's really happening, she says softly. After all these months of you working this case, worrying something wasn't right. Daniel's hand finds hers. Not over yet. Harrington has connections beyond Webb people with enough influence to make evidence disappear, witnesses recant. The FBI has the case now, CLA reminds him. Your part is done, Dan. You need to focus on recovering. Daniel's gaze shifts to Diesel, who stands alert at the window watching the comings and goings in the parking lot below. He still doesn't think it's over either. Dr. Reynolds enters with Daniel's latest test results, his expression cautiously optimistic. Your blood work is finally showing improvement. The toxins are clearing from your system, and your liver function is stabilizing. When can I get out of here? Daniel asks. Immediately, Reynolds shakes his head with a slight smile. Not for at least another week. You sustain 3 gunshot wounds, develop hepatic damage from the poisoning attempts, and your body is still fighting off a secondary infection from the ventilator. Recovery takes time. Daniel sigh in frustration, but a sharp look from CLA prevents further argument. Fine, but I need to be kept in the loop on the investigation. Captain Wilson has arranged for secure communications, Reynolds assures him, and Agent Winters left as he places a secure tablet on the bedside table. He said you will know how to access it as. Reynolds checks Daniel's vitals. He glances at Diesel, who has returned to his position at the foot of the bed. Has he eaten today? Barely, Claire admits with concern. He takes a few bites when I bring food, but he won't leave the room long enough for a proper meal. Reynolds considers this. I think I have an idea. The pediatric floor has a therapy dog program. They have specialized equipment for their service animals, including portable feeding stations that can be set up in patient rooms. Worth a try. Daniel agrees, watching his partner with concern. He's lost weight since all this started. Later that afternoon, Nurse Sanchez brings in a specialized feeding station, setting it up in the corner of the room. Daniel gives Diesel command to eat, but the loyal K9 remains hesitant, clearly torn between caring for himself and maintaining a protective watch. Go on, boy. Daniel encourages, I'm safe, you need your strength too. After moments hesitation, Diesel finally moves to the feeding station, though. He positions himself to keep Daniel in sight. While he eats, progress, Sanchez notes with a smile. Small steps outside. In the hallway, Captain Wilson speaks quietly with Agent Winters. The conversation drifts into room. Harrington's lawyers are already filing motions to suppress the evidence. Wilson says frustration evident in his voice, claiming a legal search and seizure at the pier. Let them try. Winters replies confidently. Mitchell's documentation creates an unbreakable chain of evidence and weave. Place Harrington at 3 different meetings with Webb where cash exchange hands. Daniel listens intently, his police instincts still sharp despite his weakened physical state. He catches details others might miss. The mention of offshore accounts, political donations through shell companies, pharmaceutical patents filed under aliases. When a man enters room, Daniel immediately asks, what about the Medicor connection? That's the key to the whole operation. Agent Winters nods approvingly at his insight. We've frozen their assets pending investigation. Their Panama facility was raided this morning by local authorities working with our international division. And the compounds they were testing the victims. Wilson's expression darkens. 7 confirmed deaths. Locally, the modified pain medications were causing organ failure that presented as natural complications in vulnerable populations, homeless, addicts, terminal patients without family. Perfect test subjects. Daniel says bitterly, people society already overlooked. We're working to identify and locate as many victims as possible. Winters assures him your documentation included a partial list of names that's giving us a solid starting point. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across Daniel's room, Dr. Winters arrives for her evening round. She reviews his latest test results with callous optimism. Your resilience is remarkable, Officer Mitchell, she notes, checking his surgical incisions. Most patients wouldn't have survived what you've endured. I had helped. Daniel replies, glancing meaningfully at Diesel, who has returned to his alert position after reluctantly eating. Dr. Winters follows his gaze, her initial skepticism regarding the K9's behavior now completely transformed. Yes, you did, and I owe both of you an apology if I paid more attention to what your partner was trying to tell us sooner. You're not the one who should be apologizing, Daniel assures her. Coleman and Webb betrayed everyone's trust, not just mine. Their conversation is interrupted by a commotion In the hallway, Officer Thompson appears in the doorway. His expression urgent. We've got a situation. Downstairs, Harrington's people are staging a protest. In the lobby, claims of police corruption and evidence tampering media's all over it. Daniel struggles to sit up straighter. It's a distraction. They're trying to control the narrative, or worse, Wilson adds, immediately moving to the window to survey the hospital grounds, creating chaos that could provide cover for another attempt. As if confirming their suspicions, Diesel suddenly stiffens his attention, focused on the air vent near the ceiling. His posture shifts to alert mode, the same stance he took before the previous ventilation system attack. Everyone out now, Wilson commands. Immediately recognizing the K9's warning security breach, Reynolds quickly disconnects Daniel from the monitoring equipment, while Thompson and Wilson create a protective formation around the bed. Diesel remains rigid, tracking an invisible threat only he can detect. Where can we move him? That secure, Wilson asks Reynolds as they prepare to evacuate the old isolation ward on the 5th floor. Reynolds decides quickly it has independent ventilation and restricted access. We use it during the pandemic. As they transfer Daniel to a wheelchair, the hospital security system suddenly activates emergency lights flashing over the intercom. A calm voice announces, attention, all staff security protocol Zeta is now in effect. Please proceed to designated safety areas. That's not a standard hospital code. Reynolds says, alarm crossing his face, because it's not coming from hospital security. Agent Winters realizes, drawing his weapon. Someone's hacked your system. Throughout the building, controlled chaos erupts. As staff respond to the unfamiliar security alert in the confusion, a maintenance worker pushes a cart into the service elevator, his face obscured by a surgical mask. Inside the cart, beneath cleaning supplies, lies a canister with a timer silently counting down. In Daniel's room, the evacuation continues with urgent efficiency. Diesel refuses to leave Daniel's side as they maneuver the wheelchair toward the service corridor that will take them to the secure isolation floor. Multiple bogies on the security feed. Wilson reports checking the tablet, displaying the hospital surveillance system. 3 men in maintenance uniforms entering through the loading dock, 2 more in medical scrubs coming up from the parking garage. Harrington's private security, Daniel concludes, grimly former military contractors. They'll be armed and dangerous. Agent Winters immediately radios for backup as they move swiftly through the back corridors of the hospital, avoiding the main hallways and elevators where the intruders would expect them to travel. How did they get past the FBI perimeter? Reynolds asks, helping to guide Daniel's wheelchair around a tight corner inside. Help. Daniel answers, his breath coming in painful gasps from the exertion and stress. Harrington's network runs deep. Money buys loyalty. Diesel suddenly stops his body, tense ears pricked forward toward the corridor ahead. The small group halts, immediately trusting the K9's instincts without question. Now someone's coming. Thompson whispers, moving in front of Daniel with his weapon drawn. The sound of footsteps echoes from around the corner, growing closer. Diesel's low growl vibrates through the silent corridor. Wilson motions everyone back, looking for a defensible position. A figure appears, a man in a maintenance uniform talking on a radio. He stops abruptly when he sees him, his hand moving quickly toward his waistband. Police freeze, Thompson shouts, but the man is already drawing a concealed weapon before anyone can react. Diesel launches forward with stunning speed, targeting the intruder's weapon arm with precision. The gun clatters to the floor as Diesel takes the man down with professional efficiency, pinning him without causing unnecessary harm, exactly as he was trained to do. Agent Winters secures the weapon while Wilson handcuffs the stunned intruder. Thompson checks the man's radio, which is still transmitting. They know we've moved. Mitchell, he reports, grimly. They're converging on this location. Reynolds points to a service door labeled maintenance. Only through here. It leads to the old tuberculosis wing. We can access the isolation ward from below. As they rush through the door, Daniel's condition begins to deteriorate. The stress and movement have reopened one of his surgical wounds, blood seeping through his hospital gown. We need to stop, Reynolds insists, noticing the spreading stain. He's bleeding. No time. Daniel gasps, one hand pressed against his side. Keep moving. Diesel whines, softly pressing against Daniel's leg. Is instinct to protect, wearing with concern for his partner's worsening condition. Just a little further, Wilson encourages, helping support Daniel's weight as they navigate the dimly lit corridor. Backup is on the way behind them. The sound of the service door being forced open echoes through the hallway. The pursuit is closing in, and Daniel's strength is fading. As they reach a junction in the corridor, he makes a sudden decision. You need to split up, he tells them, his voice weak but Determined they want me to rescue you are just obstacles not happening, Wilson replies firmly. No man left behind. It's not about me, Daniel insists. It's about the evidence, the case. If Harrington's people take me out, it weakens the prosecution. Star witness Reynolds checks Daniel's pulse alarm growing at the rapid, thready rhythm beneath his fingers. He needs medical attention. Immediately, the bleeding is worsening. Footsteps and voices echo from multiple directions. Now the tactical team is coordinating, closing in from different approaches. They're trapped in the mosaic corridors of the hospital's oldest section, with Daniel's condition deteriorating by the minute. In this moment of crisis, Diesel suddenly perks up his attention, drawn to a narrow service shaft almost hidden in the wall. He moves toward it purposefully, then looks back at the group, barking once clear, direct communication. He's found something, Thompson says, moving. To investigate, it's a dumb waiter shaft from when this was the original hospital building. Might be big enough for one person. Get Mitchell in there, Wilson decides instantly. Reynolds, you go with him to handle his medical needs. Winters, Thompson, and I will create a diversion to buy you time. And Diesel, silly, asks her, voice tight with fear. Daniel's hand finds his partner's head, a gesture of complete trust. He goes where I go always, as they help Daniel into the narrow shaft, with Reynolds squeezing in behind him, and Diesel somehow making himself compact enough to fit alongside his human partner. Wilson gives them final instructions: get to the isolation ward and barricade yourselves, and help is coming. But you need to buy time. The ancient dumbwaiter creaks as Reynolds manually operates the pulley system, slowly raising them towards safety, while Wilson, Thompson, and Agent Winters prepare to face the approaching threat. Diesel presses close to Daniel. In the confined space, his warm presence, both protection and comfort, as darkness envelopes him. In the loyal K9's mind, the mission remains unchanging: keep his partner safe no matter the cost. And as the shaft carries him upward, away from immediate danger, but toward an uncertain sanctuary, Daniel finds strength in that unwavering dedication. Whatever comes next, they will face it together, as they always have. The ancient dumbwaiter shaft creaks and drays as Dr. Reynolds manually works the pulley system, raising them slowly toward the 5th floor. In the cramped space, Daniel struggles to remain conscious, each labored breath a battle against the pain spreading from his reopened wound. Diesel remains impossibly still beside him, the K9's body heat providing comfort. In the chilly shaft, stay with me, Officer Mitchell, Reynolds urges, noticing Daniel, eyelids fluttering. We're almost there. The others Daniel manages. Weakly, they're outnumbered. Wilson and Thompson are experienced officers, and Winters is FBI. They know what they're doing. Reynolds assures him, though. Concern edges his voice. Our job is to get you somewhere safe where I can treat that bleeding. The shaft opens onto a dimly lit maintenance corridor on the 5th floor. Reynolds carefully helps Daniel out of the dumb waiter, support his weight. As blood continues to seep through the hospital gown, Diesel merges after them, immediately resuming his protective stance, ears alert to every sound in the unfamiliar environment. The isolation ward is through those double doors, Reynolds explains, guiding Daniel slowly forward. It was designed for containment during disease outbreaks, separate ventilation, secure access points, independent power supply. They make their way painfully down the corridor, Daniel leaning heavily on Reynolds behind them. They hear the distinct sound of gunfire echoing up through the shaft. Of diversion has turned into a firefight. We need to move faster, Reynolds urges, his medical training at war with the urgent need for speed. Each step jostles Daniel's wounds, but delay could be fatal in more immediate ways. As they approach the double doors, Diesel suddenly freezes, his attention fixed on the shadows at the far end of the hallway. A low growl builds in his throat, warning. Not fear, we're not alone, Reynolds whispers, easing Daniel against the wall for support while scanning for an alternative route. No point running. Comes a voice from the darkness. A man in a security uniform steps into view, holding a pistol equipped with a silencer. Harrington wants this wrapped up quietly. You're making a mistake, Reynolds says, positioning himself between the gunman and Daniel. The FBI has the evidence. Killing a police officer won't help Harrington now. The man's expression remains coldly professional. This isn't about helping anyone. It's about tying up loose ends. He raises the weapon. Nothing personal. What happens next unfolds in heartbeats. As the gunman takes aim, Daniel summons his remaining strength to shout a command. Diesel take the K9 launches forward with stunning speed. A blur of focused power, the gunman fires, but Diesel's attack disrupts his aim. The bullet embedding harmlessly in the ceiling. Before he can recover, powerful jaws clamp around his weapon arm with precisely controlled pressure enough to incapacitate. Without maiming the man, cries out, the gun clattering to the floor. Diesel maintains his hold, forcing the Acelon to his knees, amber eyes never leaving his face. Reynolds kicks the weapon away before quickly helping Daniel through the double doors into the isolation. Ward Diesel Bringy calls, and the K9 forces the subdued gunman to follow them inside, still maintaining his hold. Once inside, Reynolds secures the doors, engaging the isolation protocols that were designed to contain pathogens, but now serve as protection against human threats. He helps Daniel onto an examination table, immediately assessing the bleeding wound. "I need to stop this bleeding and get fluids into you," he explains, gathering supplies from cabinets that remain stocked from the ward's last. "Use your pressure" is dropping. Daniel nods, weakly, his gaze fixed on Diesel, who maintains control of the gunman while somehow stay within touching distance of his partner. "Good boy," he whispers the best. Reynolds works, quickly inserting in 4-line and applying pressure bandages to the reopened surgical wound. The gunman sits sullenly against the wall, cradling his injured arm, while Diesel maintains unwavering vigilance. "You think this changes anything?" The man finally speaks, breaking the tense silence. "Harrington has people everywhere. If not today, then tomorrow or next week. Why does he care so much about one cop?" Reynolds asks, trying to keep the man and talking while he works on stabilizing Daniel. The gunman laughs bitterly. "It's not about Mitchell. It's about what he found, those formulas he documented worth billions on the international market. Pain management without addiction, strength enhancement without steroids, the military applications, alone applications that killed innocent people." Daniel manages his voice weak, but determined. "Acceptable losses in pharmaceutical development." The gunman shrugs. "Every major medical breakthrough has its casualties. Those weren't casualties." Reynolds counters sharply. "They were murders, human experimentation, without consent, outside the isolation ward." The sound of the hospital security system returns to normal operations. Standard announcements replacing the fake security alert. Either the hackers have been neutralized or they've achieved whatever objective they were pursuing. Daniel's phone, which CLA had tucked into his hospital gown pocket, suddenly vibrates. Reynolds carefully retrieves it, reading the message. "A loud situation. Contained 5 hostiles in custody. FBI tactical team on site. Hold position." Wilson. Relief washes over Reynolds' face. "Backup has arrived. We just need to maintain control until it reaches." The gunman's expression shifts, subtly, resignation replacing calculation. He knows the operation has failed. Daniel winces as Reynolds adjusts the pressure bandage. "How bad?" "The wound reopened along the suture line." Reynolds explains, "Honestly, you've lost blood, but not as much as I initially feared. With proper treatment, you should recover fully thanks to Diesel." Daniel says, his hand finding his partner's. The K9 has maintained his position beside the examination table, while somehow keeping the gunman under control. A remarkable feat of training and music. Intelligence. The radio on the gunman's belt suddenly crackles too. Life Team 2 report status. Has the target been neutralized? Over. Reynolds and Daniel exchange glances as the significance of this message sinks, and there are still hostile forces in the hospital. Still a coordinated effort underway. Answer it. Daniel instructs the gunman. "Tell them everything's on schedule." The man hesitates, clearly weighing his options. Diesel. Daniel says quietly, and the K9 growls softly, a reminder of consequences. Reluctantly, the gunman reaches for his radio. Target secured. Proceeding with extraction over. Copy that. Rendezvous at point B in 10 minutes. The diversion team is engaging security forces on the ground level. Reynolds checks Daniel's blood pressure, concern etching deeper lines in his face. "We need to get you to surgery. That bandage is a temporary measure at best, not until we know it's safe." Daniel insists, though his complexion has grown alarmingly pale. "We don't know how many of Harrington's people are still in the building." As if in response to concern, the isolation ward's phone rings. A direct line to hospital security. Reynolds answers cautiously. "DR." Reynolds, it's Thompson. "The FBI tactical team is clearing the building floor by floor. We've detained 5 armed intruders, but there may be more. What's your status?" "Mitchell's wound reopened during the evacuation. He needs surgery." Reynolds explains quickly. "We've also detained one of Harrington's men. Diesel has him secured. Hold your in position. We're moving up to you now." With a medical team standing by, Thompson assures him the FBI has taken Harrington into custody at his office. Apparently he was coordinating this whole operation by phone. As Reynolds relays this information to Daniel, the wounded officer's expression remains troubled. It still doesn't add up. "Why risk everything with this attack?" Harrington must know we already have enough evidence to convict him. The gunman offers a cold smile. "You think this was about silencing witnesses?" Harrington doesn't care about prison time. "This was about recovering property, the formulas." Daniel realizes comprehension dawning despite his weakened state. "There was something in my documentation that hasn't been secured yet. The original research." The gunman confirms the complete chemical profiles weren't in your digital files, which means you have them somewhere else. Daniel's eyes meet Diesel's. A silent communication passing Between them, you're right. They weren't in the digital files before the conversation. Can continue the isolation. Ward doors open to reveal Thompson Wilson and a medical team in. Protective gear standard protocol for entering an isolation environment. Diesel immediately responds to familiar faces, his posture relaxing slightly, though he maintains his vigil at Daniel's side. All clear, Thompson announces. As two FBI agents take custody of the gunman, the building is secure. Wilson approaches Daniel's bedside, his weathered face reflecting both relief and concern. You look terrible, Mitchell. Feel worse, Daniel admits with a weak smile, but I'm still here thanks to your partner. Wilson acknowledges, respectfully nodding toward. Diesel never seen anything like it. That dog refused to let anything happen to you. Not poison, not armed attackers, not even hospital protocols. The medical team prepares to transfer Daniel to surgery, carefully moving him to a transport gurney. Throughout the process, Diesel remains attentive, monitoring every movement, every new person who approaches his partner. He can't come into the operating room, one of the surgeons explains gently. Hospital regulations. Danielle Can finds Diesel's head stay with Wilson. He instructs his partner. I'll be back soon. For first time since this ordeal began, Diesel faces a command. He seems reluctant to obey. His intelligent eyes move between Daniel and the surgical team, uncertainty evident in his posture. It's okay, boy, Daniel assures him. They're helping me. I need you to wait. With visible reluctance, Diesel finally accepts the instruction, moving to Wilson's side as the medical team wheels Daniel towards surgery. At the doorway, Daniel calls back weakly, Captain. The gunman mentioned original research chemical profiles. Wilson nods, and understanding will handle it. You focus on recovering. As Daniel disappears down the corridor, Diesel wins, softly pacing anxiously. His mission to protect seems unfinished. Interrupted. He'll be okay. Reynolds assures the K9, kneeling to, I level. You did your job. You kept him alive long enough for us to help him in the waiting area outside surgery. Reynolds explains Daniel's condition to CLA and the assembled officers. The bullet fragments near his spine shifted during the evacuation. It's a delicate procedure, but Dr. Winters is the best surgeon we have, and the new security arrangement. CLA asks her hand, absently stroking Diesel's head. The K9 has positioned himself facing the doors to the surgical suite, maintaining his vigil. Even now, the FBI has complete control of the hospital perimeter. Agent Winter explains no one enters without triple verification. We're not taking any more chances. Hours pass in tense waiting. Officers come and go, bringing updates on the investigation. But Diesel never moves from his position, amber eyes fixed on the surgical doors. His only concession to his own needs is accepting water when Thompson brings a bowl, drinking quickly before resuming his watch. Finally, Dr. Winters emerges, surgical mask pulled down around her neck, fatigue evident in her posture. All conversation ceases as everyone awaits a report. He's stable. She announces, relief evident in her voice. We remove the remaining bullet fragments and repair the torn sutures, barring complications. He should make a full recovery. The tension in the room visibly eases. CLA wipes tears from her eyes, and Thompson claps Wilson on the shoulder in wordless celebration. Through it all, Diesel remains focused, waiting for the one thing that matters most to him, the return of his partner. When can we see him? Say asks. He'll be in recovery for about an hour, then we'll move him to a secure room on this floor. Dr. Winters explains, one visitor a day. Time just for today. Diesel stands, as if understanding he's not included in the visitor restrictions. Dr. Winters smiles tiredly, except for Diesel course at this point. I think separating them would do more harm than good. As the group settles in for another wait, Wilson takes Reynolds aside. Mitchell mentioned something about original research and chemical profiles before he went into surgery. Any idea what he was referring to? Reynolds shakes his head. Something the gunman said about the complete formulas not being in the digital files. Wilson's gaze shifts to Diesel. Thoughtful, Mitchell said he stored digital evidence in the dog's collar because he didn't trust official channels. What if there's more? Together they approach Diesel, who watches them with intelligent eyes. Wilson kneels, slowly showing the K9 is empty. And Diesel, may I check your collar again? The dog remains still, allowing Wilson to carefully examine the tactical collar. At first, nothing seems unusual, but as Wilson rotates the thick band, he notices something tiny. Ditches in the lining different from the ones that had concealed the digital memory card. There's something else here, he murmurs, carefully feeling along the reinforced material. His fingers catch on what feels like paper tightly rolled and sealed in waterproof material sewn into lining itself. Mitchell was thorough, Reynolds observes, as Wilson carefully extracts a hidden item he didn't trust. Electronic evidence, alone, unrolled on the table. The paper reveals detailed chemical formulas, molecular diagrams, and handwritten notes. Who don't the original research Harrington was desperate to recover every criminal enterprise leaves a paper trail somewhere. And in this case, that trail was literally carried around the neck of a loyal K9 officer. This is it Agent Winters confirms after examining the documents, the complete formulas and production methods. With this we can identify every compound it manufactured and trace where it was distributed in an hour. Later, Diesel is the first to enter Daniel's recovery room. The K9 approaches the bed, cautiously nose working to catalog the new smells of antiseptic and medication. Daniel's eyes are closed, his breathing steady. Under the influence of anesthesia, Diesel gently places his head on the edge of the bed, his body finally relaxing from its days-long state of hypervigilance. For the first time since Daniel was admitted to hospital, the loyal K9 allows himself to truly rest, his mission finally complete when Daniel wakes groggy from anesthesia. The first thing he sees is Diesel's head on the bed beside him, the GK9's amber eyes watching him intently. A smile crosses his pale face as he weakly raises a hand to scratch his partner's ears. Good boy, he whispers hoarsely. Mission accomplished. Outside the room, Wilson shows the recovered documents. Your brother thought of everything. He tells her admiringly, digital evidence backed up with physical proof hidden in the one place no one would think to look, his K9 partner's collar. CLA watches through the window as her brother and Diesel share a quiet moment of reunion. It wasn't just about the items, she says softly. Dan always said Diesel was the only partner he could trust completely. Now I understand why. In the days that follow, as Daniel begins a long road to recovery, the full extent of conspiracy unravels across national headlines. Harrington, Webb, and Coleman face federal charges. The hospital implements new security protocols for medication dispensing. Investigators identify and convict victims of the unauthorized drug testing. Through it all, Diesel remains at Daniel's side, his unwavering vigilance finally rewarded with the one outcome that mattered most to him, his partner alive and healing. The loyal K9, who refused to leave the hospital bedside, had done more than just display remarkable devotion. He had actively protected when no one else could see the danger, persisted when others doubted, and ultimately saved not just his partner, but countless future victims of an elaborate criminal enterprise. Dr. Winters, making her final rounds before Daniel's scheduled transfer to a rehabilitation facility, pauses in the doorway, watching Diesel curl protectively on the bed beside his recovering partner. You know, she says to Reynolds, who stands reviewing charts nearby, when I first saw that dog refusing to leave Officer Mitchell's side, I thought it was just attachment, maybe even a hindrance to medical care. Reynolds smiles, remembering his own initial doubts. And now Dr. Winters watches as Daniel scratches Diesel's ears, the bond between them visible in every interaction. Now, I think we should consider adding K9 units to our diagnostic team. Sometimes the best medical tools aren't machines or tests, they're the instincts evolution spent millions of years perfecting. As the afternoon sun streams through the window, bathing the recovery room in golden light, Daniel Mitchell rests his hand on his loyal partner's head, their shadows merging on the hospital wall. Officer and K9 protector, and protected and unbreakable partnership that even the most elaborate criminal conspiracy couldn't sever. 2 weeks after the dramatic events at Riverside Memorial, Daniel Mitchell sits on the edge of his bed at Westbrook Rehabilitation Center, wincing as he attempts to stand unassisted. The physical therapist, a non-nonsense woman named Jessica Morris, watches with professional scrutiny. You're favoring your right side, she observes, making notes on her tab with the muscle compensation could lead to back problems if we don't address it. Now Daniel nods, gritting his teeth as he forces himself to distribute his weight more evenly. Still feels like there's a knife between my ribs when I straighten up. That's the internal scarring from the second surgery. Jessica explains it will improve with consistent therapy. Diesel lies in the corner of the room, watching the session with intense focus, unlike his time at the hospital, where he refused to leave Daniel's side even for basic needs. The K9 has adjusted to a new routine at the rehabilitation facility. He accompanies Daniel to all therapy sessions, but has learned to give space when the physical therapists need to work directly with his partner. He's picking up on your pain signals, Jessica notes, nodding toward Diesel, whose ears have pricked forward. As Daniel winces again, the tension in your facial muscles changes in your breathing pattern. He reads the before you even register the pain consciously, always, as Daniel replies with a slight smile. Even before all this, it's what makes him exceptional at detection work. He notices subtle changes